With the Splatoon 3 Grand Festival over and one of, if not the final update out, I feel well equipped to analyze each game in the series as what is likely their most fleshed out version. And because of this, I wanted to go over the series' relationship with extrinsic and intrinsic rewards, and how Splatoon 3 in particular changed a lot quite drastically compared to previous titles. And as a tiny prerequisite for those who might not be familiar with the two main types of reward systems, an extrinsic reward in the context of the series might be leveling up a catalog or ranking up in Salmon Run, which are more tangible things. And an intrinsic reward might be learning a new way to get around on a stage, or having that momentary camaraderie with random people in between matches, which is more based on internal desires. What creates an incentive to play is going to vary from person to person and what each of them values. I'm, for example, much more intrinsically motivated, specifically with those aforementioned momentary bonds that form from playing with random people in Turf War. Overall, in terms of where each game in the series sits on balancing their extrinsic and intrinsic rewards, the first two games share a lot more in common with each other than they do with Splatoon 3. So let's start by taking a look at them. We can consider the first Splatoon game to be a blueprint of sorts, establishing the main gameplay loop that would serve as a basis for future titles. This gameplay loop is pretty simple, consisting of participating in online matches to earn cash, which can then be used to buy either gear or weapons. And that of course leads back to the start for trying out the new stuff you just got, with the ultimate goal being to motivate people to play the online modes. There are some accompanying extrinsic incentives such as gear and weapon rewards in the single player and amiibo challenges, as well as much tinier things like the turfed ink counter, high scores in the mini-games, and a vibe meter that gives coins based on performance. But again, these are just accompanying incentives, and serve to feed back into that main gameplay loop, whether that be for trying out new gear, playing more matches to chip away at squid jump levels, or just to earn some more cash. And these really aren't going to be the defining reasons to play for the majority of people, which leaves only that one big extrinsic motivator in Splatoon 1 as well as Splatoon 2, hint hint. This balance of reward systems contributed to an experience more centered around intrinsically rewarding aspects of the game for me, especially once a majority of the weapons and gear are bought, leaving very little extrinsic incentives for playing. Instead, the stuff that takes center stage are things like the moment-to-moment gameplay of a match, improving my movement around stages or the aim of a weapon, and again, the most important thing for me, having that shared experience with everyone in a given match. When there's so little that relies on winning games, the outcome matters much less, and the fun of the entire match takes precedence. We'll get to Splatoon 3 very soon, but just a side note on this topic, I'd like for you all to think about when playing a match in S3, do you commonly end feeling thrilled about the entirety of what just happened, or does seeing the results screen sort of override your feelings regardless of what fun might have happened in the match? I'll get to why I think that commonly happens, but first I'll rewind a bit and talk briefly about the second game. Splatoon 2 has that same base gameplay loop as its main driving force for extrinsic rewards, with a few things now added. Those being the 100x battles in Splatfest to create some tension, single-player stats, and Salmon Run lifetime stats and rewards, which give out a newly introduced reward type, that being capsules, which can hold ability chunks, drink or food tickets, and exclusive gear. While these new things are added to the existing list of extrinsic rewards, it still sits at about the same amount as the previous game when factoring stuff removed, such as minigames and amiibo challenges. And although capsules, tickets, and 100x battles rely on winning online matches rather than being purely single-player stuff, I think the value added by these additions only marginally impacts the overall balance of reward systems, which still remains nice and even. The same cannot be said for the third entry in the series, however. Splatoon 3 takes everything from the previous games and turns it up past what it should have been turned up to. Just stumbled across a 333x Splatfest match while using H3 to mess around with? Better focus up or feel soul-crushing defeat and possibly even ashamed of yourself for letting down your teammates by just wanting to have some fun and mess around. Seriously, Splatoon 3 more than any other game in the series has some of the most contrasting feelings built into so many of its extrinsic rewards. On the one hand, winning a 333x battle can potentially be the biggest highlight of a Splatfest for someone, or even their entire time playing the game. If lost though, it can really zap a player's mood and lead to frustration, annoyance, and even discouragement from continuing at all. This isn't necessarily a bad thing though. Intense emotional reactions are a lot easier to achieve through extrinsic rewards compared to intrinsic ones. If you're someone who only plays a little bit, and aren't dedicating your time to Splatoon the same way you might other hobbies, then a manufactured, all-or-nothing situation can grant someone who only plays infrequently the ability to experience the emotional highs the game has to offer without much time investment. Unfortunately, however, a majority of other systems in Splatoon 3 beg you to not play infrequently. So many things in this game ask for the player to invest a lethal amount of playtime, often for sparse, or in the case of Salmon Run, very sparse rewards. This is of course also on top of Splatoon 3 having a first win of the day bonus, which incentivizes playing every day, something that I'll get into just a bit later. Hi, it's Rachel a year and a half after the last voice recording. This next section we'll be looking at an overview of every extrinsic reward in Splatoon 3's PvP modes, and seeing how they compare to Splatoon 2's. To make it a bit easier to follow along with, I broke the rewards down into these main groups: Cash, Catalog, Shellout Machine, Splatfest, and Miscellaneous, with these sublists representing the things you're able to get from each main group, assuming you win matches. And please note that I didn't include certain things that would technically fit into one category or another, since including something like the jukebox because it technically requires cash just feels a little petty. And also note that an asterisk indicates that a reward type isn't available at all times. For Splatoon 2, the main groups go down to only include Cash, Splatfest, and Miscellaneous, with these sublists included for each. And now, accounting for everything on each sublist, Splatoon 3 has a grand total of 33 things that rely heavily on winning matches, in comparison to Splatoon 2 only having 15, which is a 120% increase between games. Even when being more generous and reducing Shellout Machine rewards to be just the Shellout Machine itself, that is still an 86% increase in extrinsic rewards. This of course doesn't immediately indicate that Splatoon 3 is strictly worse in terms of how reward balance feels. Things like Sheldon licenses do benefit the flow of acquiring new gear by reserving cash to be spendable in other areas of the game, and not on weapons. Likewise, the Wonder Crust finally gives a definitive reward to the standout feature of the entire series, inking the ground, which it's shocking that it took 3 games to get an actual reward for. But it really doesn't benefit game feel cramming 10 million different extrinsic rewards into the game, and give that a few more numbered entries in the series and it won't be close to hyperbole anymore. It is staggering that from Splatoon 2 to 3, there was a 120% increase in extrinsic rewards in normal PvP modes alone. 120. That kind of number would be pressure enough in a game with access to proper voice chat and synergistic matchmaking, but Splatoon is very much a roll with the punches kind of series. Other team-based multiplayer games certainly have those sort of moments, but there are fundamental aspects of team-based multiplayer games that players simply don't have access to in Splatoon. So sometimes losing can feel extra sour if, as example, you can't tell a teammate where the person who just splatted you is, or you get a random team of all short-ranged weapons against a team with proper weapon synergy. I mentioned earlier that Splatoon 3 introduced a first win of the day bonus, which is heavily incentivized to get, since that bonus alone is enough to give you nearly an entire level towards your catalog, while normally you need between 7 and 11 turf war matches to achieve the same result. In addition to this, you also have the discounted Shellout Machine pull, and I don't know, maybe it is not a big deal to some people, but I really dislike opening Splatoon 3 and remembering how many rewards I missed out on in the days since I last played. It's just my own experience, but Splatoon has been a series I like to pick up and play at my own pace, the same way I do Mario Kart or Guilty Gear. I hate feeling this constant pressure to not only log in every day, but to win every game, as outlined by everything I've just mentioned. After all this, I was going to initially sing the praises of weapon battle points for being the only extrinsic reward that isn't influenced by winning or losing. But of course I was simply being silly, and it actually is influenced. My bad. It doesn't make a ton of sense considering this counter is prefaced as just being a tracker of how much turf you've inked, shown most blatantly in Splatoon 2's online app. So a random bonus towards your inkage at the end of a match is a confusing reward to a lot, since it just arbitrarily inflates what would otherwise be a cool thing to keep track of. This also means that there has never been any extrinsic reward in Splatoon divorced from the outcome of a match. Winning or losing matters for every single one of them. Which leads me perfectly into my own personal recommendations for how I'd change this. Add rewards that aren't influenced by winning. Splatoon has the perfect opportunity to base more of its extrinsic rewards on the amount of turf you ink, both lifetime and on individual weapons. Splatoon 3 already awards badges, stickers, and technically Sheldon licenses based on the amount of turf you've inked. And I think implementing something like that into other areas of the game, like catalogs, the shellout machine, and XP for clothing, would alleviate some of the pressure to win. Of course, point requirements would need adjustment to account for the lack of win and time bonuses, and some variability might be needed to also account for some weapon classes having a lower turf inked average. And now, switching over to the topic of intrinsic rewards, Splatoon has always had a wealth of foundations for players to build intrinsic rewards on top of. Of course, it isn't easy to simply attach a number for intrinsic rewards the same way it is for extrinsic ones, since they can range quite drastically from player to player. But since Splatoon 1, these foundations have continued to improve and expand, with some regressions as well. Something I've already mentioned is how Splatoon 3 took a big step forward for momentary player bonding, specifically with the holograms in between matches. Over my time playing this game, I've had so many fun interactions while waiting with other players for a match to start. Some of my favorites include the hangout spots, playing leapfrog, and high-fiving. In Turf War, I find this to help mitigate frustration with losses, since you can and often have these fun interactions with players who end up on the opposing team. And in Anarchy series matches, it elevates the victories that you get while pushing for as many wins as possible with the same teammates. I think it's also extremely blatant how much player expression and experimentation is added with Squid Roll and Squid Surge, specifically for movement around stages and specific weapon tech like Ink Brush and Splash-O-Matic. Although I do find these abilities to have some limitations because of the way stages are designed in Splatoon 3. Squid Roll is still very versatile for its armor, general movement, and the weapon tech, but Squid Surge feels mostly useless in moment-to-moment gameplay. The example that I find most apparent is Flounder Heights and how it was shortened when it was brought over from Splatoon 1. I'm sure this change is enjoyed by a fair amount of players, and that's totally valid. I'm just a bit disappointed for what could have been a stage that made Squid Surge uniquely useful, especially paired with Intensify action for even quicker movement up walls. This issue of stage design extends into the kind of paths you can take, which limits the intrinsic fun of finding cool and creative ways to get around stages. Ultimately, the developers can add as many extrinsic rewards as they want, but I think they should be built into a system that doesn't snowball into the importance of winning growing exponentially. And consideration should be given to maintain intrinsically rewarding aspects of the series, while expanding potential, not limiting it. Thank you very much for watching, and I'm sorry that this video did not release sooner. I'll be saving Salmon Run for its own video in relation to this topic, so that'll be exciting. Bye-bye for now.